Welcome to the Life Mindset Mentor Cast, the podcast that gives you practical spiritual tools that you need every week to very practically dominate stress, anxiety, fear, and depression. We will give you the basic components of a powerful mindset. We make it as easy as A, B, C for more life, more peace, more power. I am your host, Lady Katsura, and co hosting with me is the amazing.
Zainal Figo, the Christ pneumatologist. Coming to you live from the Trinidad Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
Indeed. In today's podcast, we will be discussing something that may be affecting maybe it's a friend, a loved one, someone that you knew or know. It is the topic of addiction. Because lately, the world seems to be lurching from one crisis into another. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. There are dramatic changes to how we are living our day to day lives. There's a lot of economic uncertainty. In some countries, there are political turmoil, and in others, there are social turmoil. And even in different parts of the world, people are facing natural disasters. So, on top of all of that, you have unemployment, divorce, crime, tragic accidents, everything that comes with it. A lot of people are experiencing or struggling with stress management, anxiety, and in some cases, addiction. So, we are going to start today's podcast by defining what is an addiction. So, Zin, according to the psychological perspective, what is an addiction?
According to that psychological perspective, um, an individual with an addiction, despite adverse consequences, tend to use drugs, or they begin to participate in a behavior for which the rewarding effects provide a convincing motivation to repeat the practice. The use of drugs such as alcohol, inhalants, opioids, cocaine, nicotine, or activities such as gambling can be involved in addiction. People who are addicted to drinking or using drugs to do to do so to change their mood, or maybe even to deal with painful emotions. Right now, that in particular is the psychological perspective, but our research at the Zinkikiture International Institute of Pneumatology has revealed that every person's spirit, in essence, an entity of thought, and the mobilization of the spirit or the functional mechanism of a spirit is its logic. So I just want to say that again. Every person is a spirit, and in essence, an entity of thought. And the mobilization of the spirit or the functional mechanism of any spirit or any human being, human mind, is its logic. So when a spirit does not have a logic, and in this case, when we say spirit, we're talking about human beings, when they don't have a logic that is functional in the situation or circumstance in which they find themselves, what happens is that they become stagnant, or or according to how psychology may term it, the energy becomes stagnant, or according to psychology, the energy becomes paralyzed. They're in a form of paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
Whilst there's a continuous generation of the energy, because everyone's spirit or energy is self-determining and self-generating. Now, that generation of energy needs to be vented. Once it is paralyzed, the energy needs to be vented somehow. And so a lot of persons end up using props to try to expend that energy. Another scenario where addiction comes in is when there's a lack of self-approval. In this society, we have a lot of instances where persons have not actually been tutored or schooled into a self-generating approval. So from the adults right back down to teenagers, there's a lot of the difficulty or struggles with regards to self-approval, and the lack of self-approval results in use of external things to distract them from the feelings of inadequacy that they're experiencing.
Right.
All right, and the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines addiction as a compulsive, chronic, physiological or psychological need for a habit-forming substance, behavior, or activity having harmful physical, psychological, or social effects, and typically causing well-defined symptoms such as anxiety, irritability, tremors, or nausea upon withdrawal or abstinence. Right? They define addiction as a state of being addicted. But as we mentioned, our research has actually dived deeper into that rabbit hole, and we've come to the realization that what the person is really experiencing in most cases is a sense of a feelings of a lack of self-approval or
Mm-hmm.
inadequacy, or they are in some form of situation, some sort of time or period of their life where the logic that they have is not functioning, it's not functional to help them to move from point A to point B, from where they are to where they would like to be. And that energy, the self-generating and continuous generation of energy, needs to be vented, and so they look for props to do so.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, what we're going to do now is identify what are some of the forms of addiction. Now that we've identified what addiction is. So, I'll start with the most common addictions because, of course, we are familiar with hearing them. So, the most common addictions will include drinking, smoking, substance abuse, pornography, sex addiction, gambling, heroin, and the list can go on and on and on. And then there are the other forms of addiction that people don't pay that much attention to. They don't treat it as if it is as serious, which will include like phone addiction, internet addiction, food. Some people are addicted to eating, whether it's junk food or snacks or whatever it is they have developed that codependency on. And then there are video games. Some people take it to another level. And there are also sedatives. With the case with sedatives, millions of Americans are prescribed barbiturate sedatives, which basically are sleeping pills to treat tension and sleep disorders and all these things that come with anxiety and stress. So I'm going to identify, for the purpose of narrowing in on what our discussion is going to be on, phone addiction in particular. And what are a few signs of phone addiction? Because I mentioned that in one of the list in the list that is not so popular. So with the phone addiction, I'm going to identify what are a few signs of phone addiction so people can have an idea as to what the not so popular addictions look like. So if you have an addiction to phone, for example, you'll be having a fear of missing out. You probably feel like you're going to miss something, not in the loop, probably going to miss important information or news if you don't check your phone regularly. And as a result, you're always walking around with your phone in your hand, always keeping it nearby, not out of your sight or out of your reach. And you're compulsively checking like your social media accounts because of anxiety, probably anxious that others are having a better time, or someone is going to post a picture that you're going to miss out on, or people may be leading a more exciting life than you, or you probably just would like to feel like you are part of something. This also happens at night where people who experience phone addiction will get up regularly at night, so their sleep patterns are broken so that they can continuously check their phone. Another sign will include feeling of dread, anxiety, or panic if you leave your smartphone at home.
Hmm.
That one, I can say I probably experienced that some time ago, where the battery runs down or the operating system crashes, and then you feel like you are a fish out of water. And if, like in some cases, the people feel like phantom vibrations of the phone. You know, the little kind of thing it makes in your pocket. Because you think that your phone has vibrated, but when you check, there are no messages or updates. Another symptom or sign rather of a phone addiction is trouble completing tasks at home or at work. So you may have begun, let's say, doing your laundry or cooking a meal, and because you are so busy chatting online or texting or playing video games, it's difficult to complete that task. And you find yourself working late more often because you can't complete your work on time because your whole schedule is thrown off because of this addiction. Another one is isolation from family and friends. So in this case, you may a social life, for example, may be suffering because you're spending more time on your phone or your devices rather than with interacting with the people around you. And it's not that you don't want to. In this case, is that the the addiction, the phone that you're using to validate yourself with at that time seems more important. So if you're in a meeting chatting with friends or whomever it is, and you lose track of what has been said because you're constantly checking your phone, that's something to kind of put some tabs on. And probably family or friends may have expressed concern about it. That is something to question yourself on because sometimes you're not aware of it if you're so absorbed in it. And the last one I'll state on this note is if you feel like no one is real in your life. So, in some cases, people feel like because of the addiction, everything is cyber. And so they feel like there's no more real life activities, everything is in the phone. And then you feel like nobody understands you, like your online friends, because your life now is limited to the phone. So, I'm going to pause right there on some of those signs of smartphone addiction. And I'm not saying that we are not diagnosing anybody here, we're just putting out some information for consideration. And what we are going to talk about next, I'll ask in this one, what are some of the effects of smartphone addiction? So you talk about the signs now. What effect does it have on people who are addicted to it?
Well, let's jump into that after this break.
You are listening to the Life Mindset Mentorcast, the podcast that gives you the tools that you need every week to very practically dominate stress, anxiety, fear, and depression. Verified by pragmatic and experimental research of the Zinke Kitsura International Institute of Pneumatology. We give you the basic components of a powerful mindset. We make it as easy as A, B, C. You can also find content by Zine and Ketsuro through www.internationalinstituteofpneumatology.com. To access weekly episodes of this podcast, other resources, and mentorship, become a Silver Star member at www.patreon.com/scene underscore ale underscore fuego. More life, more peace, more power.
Right, so just before the break, we spoke about your addictions with regards to different types of effects that addictions may actually cause. So what we want to jump into here now is some other effects here with regards to this what you're calling it smartphone addiction.
Yeah.
So, so smartphone addictions may include a number of issues related to impulse control. Right now, they've actually done some surveys on this, and these are some of the things that they have found. That some of the number of issues related to impulse control includes increasing loneliness and depression, right? Fueling anxiety, increasing stress, um, exas- exacerbate, exacerbating attention deficit orders, diminishing your ability to concentrate and think deeply or creatively, disturbing your sleep, and encouraging self-absorption. Right? It also mentioned here, according to their research, overloads of knowledge. So a person can have compulsive web browsing, video streaming, playing sports, or monitoring news feeds can result in lower work or school productivity and isolate you for hours at a time. From real world relationships to interests and social pursuits, compulsive use of the internet and mobile apps will cause you to overlook other elements of your life. Now, as you notice here, all of these things here are just, as we mentioned, from the pneumatological perspective, ways of occupying yourself with distracting that sense of that sense of inadequacy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And in most cases, persons don't really communicate it because we live in a society where everything is pretty much goal driven, and so people may just tell you, you need to set goals. You need to set goals for your life and pursue those goals. But setting goals to the life for your life in particular may be the answer to the conundrum of the logic for some persons, whilst for others it may be more personal things, more intimate things. You have also cyber sex addiction, compulsive use of internet pornography, sexting, nude swapping, or adult messaging services can impact negatively on your real life intimate relationships and overall emotional health,
Yeah,
which is
especially
understandable.
for
Go ahead.
people in relationships.
Right? Yeah, which is understandable because what you're actually doing is using something else to fulfill the function that your relationship should be there to fulfill.
Mm-hmm.
All right. While online pornography and cyber sex addictions are said to be types of sexual addiction, the internet makes it more accessible, relatively anonymous, and very convenient. It's easy to spend hours engaging in fantasies, impossible in real life. Notice what is being said here. Fantasies that are impossible in real life. A lot of persons even fall into pornography because they've actually come up in a culture that didn't prepare them to seem sexually confident
Mm-hmm.
or to be attractive and appealing to the eyes. And because they have a sense of inadequacy in that area, they fall back on the pathway of least resistance,
Right.
which is where they can experience what they want to experience as much as they can, um, while trying to move away from that sense of inadequacy. Those same persons, if you actually take them and you revamp them and you understand which part of their logic that they're feeling that sense of inadequacy, that sense of paralysis in their life, it could be in many different areas. But for persons who may not actually have a sense of social strength or social confidence because they don't feel that they may not feel like that how they are right now is socially approved for the opposite sex, for them to be considered attractive to the opposite sex. This is what they're going to be doing. If you take them and you revamp them, if for example it is that, and you revamp it, you'll notice that the pornography in particular will become less attractive,
Mm-hmm.
will be less of an impulse, right? Other people use excessive use of dating apps that facilitate casual sex, right, which can make it more difficult to develop long-term intimate relationships or damage an existing relationship. Again,
Indeed.
again, all of these things are just props. Yeah. So you wanna go in and actually dive into how to deal with an addiction, or just how to help someone with an addiction.
Sure. Because we covered a lot of the what I would say the effects and the signs and stuff like that as it relates to the addiction. Now the real question is how are you going to deal with it? Or if you know someone who's experiencing it, how are you going to actually help them deal with the addiction? So as Liam was identifying in the beginning of the podcast, the pneumatological perspective of of the addiction rather is simply that the energy is like self-generating and it becomes stagnant or paralyzed and it's a constant generation of that energy and people are not aware as to how to deal with that or how to to manage the energy. And as a result, they go to these things to try and make themselves feel better, and in some cases for self approval and so on. So, the first step we want to take is one, identify, and I'm just going to list two steps here. Identify where are the areas of their lives that they are feeling stagnant, or the areas where they are not feeling approved, which is pretty simple. And this requires being completely frank with yourself. Or in the case of someone communicating with you, this is simply they need to be as sincere as they can be. This is going to work or going to help them only with honesty.
Right.
And to find a functional solution to make it happen, and they will lose the desire for the addiction when they find a functional solution through which the inspiration can be channeled. So as Zim is identifying, the energy is self-generating. It's constantly flowing. So what they basically need to do is identify, okay, this is the problem, find a functional solution to it, and eventually, or in a matter of just a matter of time, short time, they lose the desire for the addiction when the functional solution is taught. And make notice that we said functional solution here, not just closing your eyes and imagine it going away. That kind of stuff is not going to work
Yeah,
because you're actually,
and I put concrete functionality in place.
yeah, because you're dealing with an actual problem.
Something that is actually functional, something that is moving you from point A to point B, and it is a solution.
Indeed. So I actually gonna, before we bring this podcast to an end, I would like to put a scenario on the table for you. And Zain, I'll throw this question out at you. Because a lot of parents, well, as a matter of fact, because of the pandemic, we're all aware that most of the children are home and they have a lot more access to technology than they did before, because before they were in schools. And so there's a rise, a reported rise in addiction with smartphones in particular for children, and I'd say teenagers. So I'm asking this to you, Zane. If someone were to come to you, how would you deal with a situation like this? A mother's to come to you and she's expressing that a teenage daughter or son has an issue with a smartphone addiction and she's not too sure how to practically deal with it. Would you or can you share some practical self help tips in dealing with, like, I'm just narrowing on smartphone for the purpose of this podcast. We can go into all of the different types of addiction here and how to deal with them. So just smartphone for now, smartphone addiction. What would you do or recommend?
Well, the first thing that I would actually encourage everyone to consider is the use of the word addiction. All right, because usually in cases like these, this does not necessarily fall under the category of an addiction, and because
Mm-hmm.
we tend to use the word addiction, these words that psychology has actually um, tailored in a way to be able to give a particular perspective. You may be using these words and actually attributing something that is not really the issue. You may say that is an addiction. You begin to treat your child as though the child has an addiction, and then you begin to give the child an indirect message that something is wrong with them.
Right.
That will be a huge mistake,
Mm-hmm.
because as children, and I'm saying this from our research at the Institute of Pneumatology, the International Institute of Pneumatology, what we have realized is that the spirit, or we call the energetic system in some cases, or the mind, because the spirit in particular is mind. Mind is energy. That's how you actually mobilize. Your mind is in and of itself an energy source.
Right.
And for those persons who may have children, you're growing up in your home, what you do not say verbally, the child will be articulated or communicated rather, either by what you are alluding,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very easy for a mind to learn something by principle. So the way you treat the child, actually, that principle, the principle in which the principle that you are applying, the child is experiencing. And even though the child may not be able to intellectually explain what you are doing, they understand it by feeling. That is the nature of the spirit or the energy or the mind. So that's the first thing I want to get off the table. I encourage
Right.
all parents to stop looking at your children as though it is an addiction, because you're using the word an addiction, and the addiction is actually seen as an issue, as some sort of a treatable issue, or a treatable, some sort of medical, I wouldn't say medical, but mental or psychological issue. And because of that, you are actually going to be creating a problem where there may not be a problem.
Dangerous waters.
The second thing that I encourage all parents to consider is that most teenagers who exist in a peaceful environment, um, unless they are in an environment where it's very hostile, then that environment and the hostility of that environment would actually drive them into a sense of feeling inadequate to deal with it. And so they are going to look for an avenue in their paralysis to expend their energy. There's nothing wrong with the child. In that case, something is wrong with the culture at home. And that should be considered. But if the child is in a peaceful environment, it may seem to have an addiction due to two things. Number one, seeking self approval or self love. And because most parents within our modern day society do not understand the energetics or the dynamics of the mind, they do not have an idea as to how to actually train or guide the mind of the child for the child to actually function from a place of self-approval. And because of the cultures in this modern day society where everything is driven in ways that doesn't actually give room for parents to spend much time with children, or for even parents to actually walk with children through society and through the difficulties and the struggles that they're going through, the child in particular now turns to the social environment for a sense of approval. We're looking for social validation.
Yeah, we see that like all over Instagram and TikTok and
It's
where all
all
these
over
youths are
social media.
posting. Yeah.
All over social media, where persons actually, youths, teenagers, they are now driven on social media to do things looking for likes. How much times their post was liked, how much times they were shared, and how um how far have they gotten on the ladder of
Mm-hmm.
social media fame, and they validate themselves by that. It's so strong, on social media, that anytime somebody actually communicates or says something that is negative, it can shoot them into depression.
Wow.
It can shoot them into depression, and shoot them into anxiety. For some persons, it can actually affect them very, very dramatically, being able to function, experience anxiety. And for some others who may have a very different way of actually dealing with a lack of approval and validation, it could cause them into going into depression. And for some persons, it can go into even suicide,
Hmm.
because the child is actually seeking validation on social media by likes, follows, sharing, how much is just shared, and how far they are on the social media ladder. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one you want to consider. And the second thing in particular is you may have actually allowed there is a case where um, the child was actually left to their own routine, and the routine became a culture. Yeah, and so that becomes where life is, by culture. Right? Now, on the first one that I mentioned, which is self-approval, you may want to actually consider where the child is actually feeling a sense of inadequacy. These are conversations you need to have with your child to be able to actually identify it, or if not converse, because they may not be able to converse. What you can actually, as a parent, be attentive.
Mm-hmm.
Be attentive to where the child seems like it, it feels that he or she feels a sense of inadequacy. Right? They don't have what it takes to bridge from where they are to where they want to feel approved. Nobody's actually communicating the logic or the solution to do that, right? And where there's a culture, then some parents may be they're busy and they actually allow the child to occupy themselves through social media, through devices. That becomes a culture.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do? So concern number one, where the child may be actually function from a self of, well, two things in number one, which is the feeling of inadequacy, that they, sorry, looking for approval on social media because the home environment hasn't actually taught them how to be self-validated. Or two, they feel a sense of inadequacy in some area, and they're venting that, and they're expending their energy on social media, on their devices, their smartphones, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But the first one, I'll encourage parents to pay attention. To pay attention, and the only way to deal with that is actually to address the inadequacy of the child, to walk with the child through that sense of inadequacy. Right? I can't dive into that here. On number two, if the person feels, sorry, the first one is actually concerning lack of self-approval or self-validation. The second in particular, which is sense of inadequacy, you want to be attentive to where the child is actually experiencing that sense of inadequacy, and encourage the child in both cases to do things to boost their self-esteem. Right? Encourage them to get into activities. It may be laborious at first
Mm-hmm.
because their logic has been built on social media. And changing logic is always a very hard crank at first.
Yeah.
But get them involved in activities that boost their self-esteem. Find out where this sense of inadequacy is, or this lack of validation is, and get them involved in things that boost their self-esteem. Once they become inspired by actually meeting the criteria for their self-esteem to be met, to be boosted, you realize that the smartphone becomes a little less important. And the last in particular, which is the routine, simply change the culture of the child. Again, it may be difficult because when you're changing logic from one logic to the next, it's always a hard crank. But change the culture of the child. Get the child involved in more activities. Encourage the child to be involved in more activities where they can exercise their social their social their social machine, their social logic, their social skills, right? Their social dexterity, so to speak. Right? So I hope that is actually helpful to those listening. And I just want to just actually identify here that what we're saying here concerning addiction is not the all in all. Right? For persons who are adults, this is not specific to all types of addiction. And might I say, even deeper, it is not specific to every issue that persons have that actually allow them or cause them to feel a sense of inadequacy.
Mm-hmm.
That sense of inadequacy can be linked to a million of different things, and for each person, it can be different. And once you actually can become real with yourself, as an adult especially, and begin to look at the area that is feeling sense of inadequacy and find the logic that helps you to bridge from where you are to a feeling and a sense of adequacy, a functional solution to move forward, you realize your addiction falls into nothingness.
Right. That is so true. So this indeed, I think, was very insightful. And as you mentioned, we know it's not the all in all, but for people who are dealing with these cases, like with the cell phone and the children with self approval issues and so on, it is something definitely to consider. So that brings us to the end of our episode for today. This is the Life Mindset Mentor Cast, the podcast that gives you practical spiritual tools that you need every week to very practically dominate stress, anxiety, fear, and depression. We'll give you the basic components of a powerful mindset. We make it as easy as A, B, C for more life, more power, and more peace. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am your host, Lady Katura, and my amazing co host.
Zainal Fuego, the Christ Pneumatologists, and we encourage you to please post your takeaways from this episode, your feedback, And if you have any questions, please feel to post them in the comments wherever this is posted, and we will get back to you in the upcoming episodes. For those of you who may want more information and may want more assistance in this area, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. You can get in contact with us on Facebook through the Facebook group Life Mindset Mentors. Get in contact with us there. You can reach out to Zane Pear on Facebook, to Bartholomew, or go directly to www.internationalinstituteofpneumatology.com, because this is the pneumatological perspective of this. Be encouraged.